All right, so what we're going to talk about here is the general feature or features associated with plant structure, plant growth, and this thing we call plant differentiation, or more appropriately, cellular tissue differentiation. So this is going to apply primarily to the vascular plants. So the non-vascular, they work a little bit differently because some of these plant structures are not going to be present in some of those guys. So what I want to do is talk about the general structure, the growth of the plants, how they work, things like that. But really what we're going to do is apply it primarily to the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. Those will be the primary plant groups we'll take a look at in regards to structure, growth, and differentiation. The reason for that, let me put some information in here for us. The primary reason that I want to apply it to those groups is because over 90% of plants on Earth that we see on Earth today, I should say, are vascular plants that are flowering. So this is the bulk, by and large, the bulk of all of the terrestrial plant life that we're looking at out there. Okay, so you look out your window and the odds are the vast majority you see are these vascular flowering plants. They may not be flowering right now, but they are plants that will produce flowers, that will produce seeds. So some of the key, let me put this in here, some of the key points to make about these flowering plants. Well, A, they're flowering. B, they use a thing called double fertilization. And we'll talk about all of this, but double fertilization is how they reproduce. They form a structure called endosperm. And by and large, the seeds are enclosed within a fruit. Okay, so those are going to be the big features of these vascular flowering plants. And when I talk about this plant structure, growth, and differentiation, it's primarily applying to these. So take a moment, pause the video, go look outside your window, take a quick picture of the plants, and then start looking at it. And they're going, okay, what do I see? Depending on where you live, maybe you're looking at grass, flowering plant. Maybe you're looking at a maple tree or an oak tree or whatever tree in your yard, and it's got leaves on it that are probably going to be falling off in the fall. Those are flowering plants. Now, if you have a pine tree, a little bit different. But by and large, again, 90% these flowering plants. So let's take a look at a quick, very, very brief, quick overview of the life cycle. And for a great example here, we're going to talk about oak trees and acorns. So perhaps you have an oak tree in your yard. Maybe it's a giant, massive 300-year oak tree. Look on the ground. You're going to find acorns all over the place. When you guys come to campus and you're walking into campus, that strip of grass and trees between the circle drive before you get to the buildings, those big giant trees there are primarily oak trees. Look on the ground. Be careful when you're walking. If you're walking there during certain times of year when all the acorns have fallen, there's thousands of them. But let's start with the acorn. How does the acorn even get produced? Well, it has to come from a mature oak tree. So in order for that acorn to be produced, in the springtime, the oak tree is going to produce flowers. So you're going to see these little white fuzzy things on the tip of some of the branches. And those flowers are those are reproductive structures. It captures the pollen. One releases pollen, the other one captures the pollen. Once the flowers are done releasing pollen, they dry up, and then you see these things hanging on the tips of those branches. That tells you that was or is a flowering plant. Now, provided the pollen got to the egg, a seed's going to develop. that seed, that offspring, we call it the embryo that grows and develops, that starts out as an acorn. The acorn is the baby oak tree. It is the child. And right here in this image, we see 3 acorns. An oak tree has the biotic potential to produce thousands and thousands of acorns. But we'll talk more about this when we get to ecology. The vast majority of these, they're not going to make it. Now, the oak tree's best friend turns out is a squirrel, because the squirrels will gather up these acorns, they'll go and bury the acorns, and that's what allows the oak tree the opportunity for germination in the spring. So without those animal friends, oak trees' life cycles cannot complete or don't complete nearly as well. Now, there's plenty of other animals that also eat acorns, turkeys and deer and all sorts of other animals out there, but really the squirrel is their best friend, because that squirrel may gather up 15, 20, 30, 50, whatever acorns and bury them all over the yard or all over the woods. And odds are they're going to forget a few of them. Or if the squirrel doesn't make it through the winter, next spring, all of those acorns that they buried are going to possibly germinate. Right, so as we go through the life cycle of plants and we talk about their structure and the growth process, remember, we're going to focus primarily here on the flowering vascular plants. Okay, so again, look out your window, start identifying which plants do you have out there. Are they flowering? Are they evergreen? Are they deciduous? Are they what we call herbaceous? Are they woody? What general terminology do we use for your plants? So herbaceous means, or in general, when we talk about an herbaceous plant, make some room. Herbaceous plants die back or dies back every year. That sounds better. Die back every year. So that big weed in the yard that at the end of the summer, early fall, turns brown and dies off, done. That tends to be an herbaceous plant. Woody plants tend to persist year after year. These things tend to be long-lasting. They produce wood. That wood grows, it thickens, it enlarges. It's a durable structure that remains year after year after year. How long? Well, that just depends on the plant. Some woody plants may live for hundreds of years. Other woody plants might only live 20 years. There's a lot of variation there, but they tend to persist year after year. All right, so these two terms, herbaceous and woody, are not scientific levels of classification. It's not a kingdom, it's not a phylum, it's not any of that. It's just a category. It's just a way we group plants together to say, oh, you're herbaceous, you're woody. How do you fit into this category? A couple other terms. Let me put these down here. Do a little rearrangement here. A couple other terms. Again, general terminology to associate with flowering plants. Annual. So if something's an annual, it dies every year. They tend to be herbaceous. I want you guys to think about what is the most common annual in the state of Illinois. Or let's go with the top 3. Oh, I should say top. Top. Okay? Create a list. What are the top 3 annual plants, annual herbaceous flowering plants in the state of Illinois? Work on your list. The perennials. Perennials are going to be plants that live for several years. Now, these could be herbaceous or woody. They could be around for quite a while. Look out your window. Again, what plant do you see year after year after year after year? Sometimes they come back from the root system. They die off at the end of fall and then come back from the root system again. Other times, if they're a tree, they're there. You see the trunk, the branches year round. It produces leaves in the spring. They're there all summer. They drop off in the fall. If that's the case, we would then consider or call these plants deciduous. Deciduous are plants that they're perennial plants, woody perennial plants that lose their leaves all at once. Sometimes though we have plants we call evergreen. These are plants that will shed their leaves over a long period of time. Usually we think about Christmas trees or pine trees or what we officially call the conifers. And those are evergreens that are constantly shedding needles, their leaves. They lose a few here, a few there, a few there, a few there. Year round, they're dropping needles. Year round, they have leaves or needles. But the deciduous, every fall, all those leaves come down. You have to rake leaves, but then you don't have any leaves on the tree throughout the winter and into the early part of spring. Okay, so some general terminology, not scientific classification, when we're talking about the plants, the vascular flowering plants. Okay, so you guys think about it and you're like, oh, I want to put some plants out or flowers out. Do I do perennials? Do I do annuals? What is the evolutionary pro and con of each of these different groups of plants? So, okay, general plant structure here. Roots and shoots. The root system kind of goes without saying. It is this portion of the plant, the shoot system, this portion of the plant. Now, roots generally, and I want to stress this, generally are below ground. Not an absolute rule, so don't think below ground roots, above ground shoots. Some plants, roots are above ground. Other plants, shoots are actually below ground. It just depends on the plant and how it has evolved to its particular environment. But we're going to look at and talk about root systems, shoot systems, leaves, stems, trunks, branches, root fibers, all that kind of stuff when we're looking at general plant structures. And then how do these things grow and develop? But take a razor and slice through any part of this plant. Let me do, I like that color. All right, I'm going to take a big razor and go right through the root there and take a wafer thin slice of it and look at it. And here's my root cross section. Maybe I'll do it in the stem and do the same thing up here. Maybe I'll come up here in the leaf and go and do it in the leaf and look at the cross section. When I look at these cross sections, whether it's the leaves, the stems, the roots, we're going to see the same exact tissues associated with, or tissue groups, I should say, associated with those cross sections. So that is something I want to stress here. When we're looking at tissue systems within the plants, we're going to see all three of these across the entire plant body. It doesn't matter where you're at. Now, there will be variation in which system is more prevalent in certain areas, but the three tissue systems we're going to be seeing here: ground tissue, vascular tissue, and dermal. Oh, I'm supposed to say number 2. And then number 3, dermal tissue. Okay, so those are going to be the 3 tissue systems we want to explore, take a look at what they do, and look at examples of cell types within these tissue systems. So we'll be talking about that in the second part of our lecture.